Well, I didn't open that email. So, Christine, I'm going to have to ask you to introduce yourself.
Okay. All right. That works for me. Well, I am Christina Tutterow. I have been in this presbytery since I think July of 2018. I was trying to get the date right. 2018. I moved here from West Virginia, where I was serving a congregation as a transitional pastor. And before that, I have served in the Shenandoah Valley. I served there for 8 years as well. And I am now a minister at large here in Presbyterian, Western North Carolina. I live here in Fairview with my husband of 36 years this year and our four cats. So that's my introduction for myself. And I will say that I am very grateful to be able to do this today. I see several people who I know and a few that I don't. I imagine that some of you really don't know me as well, and there is well, not a good reason, but there's a reason for that. I've been living with a condition that limits my mobility somewhat for several years, and so it's not as easy for me, and sometimes just impossible for me to get to some of the things that happen in this presbytery. Um, I'm deeply grateful for these kind of opportunities that we can do things over Zoom, and also for the fact that we now have two of our presbytery meetings that happen by Zoom as well. So that gives me the opportunity to be a little more participatory in some of the things. I know not everybody is thrilled that we've gone to some of these Zoom meetings, but that's I think that's kind of why we're here today doing these kinds of educational events, is to start thinking about the fact that, you know, making space for more people with differing abilities means that we're going to have to make some adjustments in the ways that we do things. Hopefully the fact that you're here today means that you're open to thinking through or possibly making some of those shifts. The presentation that I have prepared today is on PowerPoint. So I'm going to end up sharing my screen for a large portion of our time together. I'm hoping that this will only go maybe 40 minutes, and then we'll have time for some questions afterwards if anybody has those. I will say, I know the flyer that went out said that I was going to cover three things, and one of those was about interpersonal conversations with folks who have disability, and I have actually dropped that from the presentation, but I will be making, if I can get your emails from Tanya after we're done, I will be sending out a lot of information about what I've talked about today. So some resources, some handouts, and that kind of thing. And one of the things I'm going to make available is a presentation that I did for Montreat Presbyterian last year that did have a pretty good discussion about interpersonal conversations. So you will be getting the information from me, just not in this presentation here today. And
Christina, thank
yes,
you for that introduction. And maybe we could just quickly ask people to unmute and say who they are and where they're from before you
that'd be
get
great.
started.
Yeah, absolutely. That'd be great.
Jill?
Hi, I'm Jill Kimbrell, and I live on the easternmost portion of our presbytery. I live in Belmont, and I serve at First Presbyterian Church in Gastonia. I'm a recent grad of seminary, and I am serving as a pastoral assistant here. And I'm on the CE committee, or sorry, the Faith Formation Committee. Um, so, longtime member of our presbytery.
Thank
Great.
you. And Tanya?
Hey there, I'm Tanya Williams. I work at the Presbytery office in Morganton, and I am the staff person for the faith formation team.
Thank you. Ed?
I'm Ed Forsyth. I'm in Belmont, North Carolina, along with Jill. And I attend First Presbyterian in Belmont, but I'm a retired pastor and has served at New Hope Presbyterian in Gastonia. And I I was going to say something else, but that's about it. I'm chair of the committee. That's it. I'm chair of this committee, so that's who I am.
Thank you. James?
I'm Jim Taylor. I live in the northernmost part of our presbytery. Oops, just had a cat attack here. So I live in Banner Elk, and I'm a retired commissioned pastor, and I'm also a presbytery associate for Yancey, Mitchell, and Avery County. So.
Thank you, Jane.
I'm Jane Alexander, and I live in Montreat, and I go to Montreat Presbyterian Church.
Thank you, Jenny.
I'm Jenny, and I'm a retired educator, and I sing in the choir with Christina at Montreat Presbyterian Church.
Thank you, Edna.
Hi, I'm Edna Baines, and I live in Montreat now. I'm a retired pastor, but in my previous life, I worked at Union Presbyterian Seminary and had the great privilege and pleasure to know Christina when she was a student there and participated in so many things, and I have loved following her. Also, Jill Kimball, but I have loved following Christina, and it's wonderful that we've ended up here in the same neck of the woods.
Thank you, Edna. Tamara?
I'm Tamara Puffer, and people pronounce my name Tamara all the time, so don't worry about it. I'm a Presbyterian minister who's a member of large at the Presbytery of, Western North Carolina. We all are. I attend Asheville First Presbyterian Church, and I'm a member of the Disability Committee with Christina and a couple other people.
Thank you. Mary Jo?
Hi, I'm Mary Jo Dean. I am a good bit north of you folks. I'm in Newcastle Presbytery on the Delmarva Peninsula. I'm an 06 graduate from Union PSE. Hi, Edna. Hi, Christina. I am a transitional pastor at Buckingham Presbyterian Church here in Berlin, Maryland.
Thank you. Madison?
Hi, I'm Madison Guevara. I recently switched from First Presbyterian Church in Cherryville, North Carolina, and now I'm working at Southminster Presbyterian Church in Gastonia. I am their Director of Faith Formation and also a recent graduate of my MACE degree from UPSM.
Thank you. Gail?
This is Gail and George Sawyer, and we're members of Montreat Presbyterian Church and sing in the choir with the rest of these people. And we're on a committee with Christina for Flat Creek Crossing neurodiverse persons. So we're really looking forward to this presentation.
Thank you, Gail. And Robin?
I'm Robin Tutterow, husband of Christina Tutterow.
All right, and I'm Bruce Henderson. I'm a semi-retired college professor, and I live in Silva. And our church is looking for a new good pastor. So if you know any good candidates, send them our way. Thank you. And Christina, it's all yours.
All right, great. So as I said, I'm going to do this by PowerPoint, so you're probably not going to be able to see me. You will see my screen if I can figure out how to share that. And I'm hoping that we'll have some time afterwards. That's not what I want. All right, hold on. All right, share screen. I have never done this before, as you can tell. So let's see if I can get this right. Okay, there we go. I don't know what you're going to need to do. You'll probably need to minimize the screen on the side with the Zoom folks, if you know how to do that, just so that you can see all of this. But we're going to start back at the beginning. All right, can everybody see that?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so I'm starting here. This is what's called a belonging wheel, and it's put together by Dr. Eric Carter. Dr. Carter is an extensive writer of books and articles on inclusion and making sure that everybody feels welcomed and invited. You can see that kind of what he's trying to get at here is that there are 10 aspects that everybody kind of needs to feel like they belong. I'm betting that nobody would argue with any of these. I think our churches do a fairly good job of making sure that their members feel like they have all of these things, that they feel invited and welcome and befriended and accepted and cared for, and all of the others. We do a somewhat poorer job of doing it with folks who are newer to our congregation or visitors. Visitors, it's really hard to hit all 10 of these. But a lot of times where we really fall short is when we have folks in our midst that are living with disabilities, or the family members of the people who are living with those disabilities, because we just don't really know how to do it. And I think there are 4 of these that are typically the ones we kind of fall shortest on. And I would say the 4 that those are is the biggest one is needed. So that's near the upper left. And after that, I think that it's known kind of toward the bottom right, and then accepted. And unfortunately, the last one that I would say where we fall short is present. So people with disabilities, sometimes because our facilities aren't accessible, and sometimes because we aren't as accessible, we don't really know how to handle people that come in with disabilities. So people end up not being present. You also have the issue about people with disabilities not being invited to be part of committees or leadership positions because we aren't really sure what gifts they have, because we don't get to know them. So that's where the known part comes in. So we end up feeling like we're not needed, we're not really known, and sometimes it feels like we're not accepted because we know that there's accommodations that need to be made for us, modifications, or sometimes the modifications and changes that need to be made as far as attitudes go with the folks that are in congregations. So those are the 4 that I think we kind of struggle with. And I'm hoping that this presentation will kind of address all 4 of those. So how do we get better at this? The first way to kind of start working on this is to evaluate where you are currently. There are 2 congregational audits that I would suggest that you take a look at. The first one of those is known as the Congregational Audit of Disability and Inclusion, and that's actually from the PCUSA directly. It can be found on their website, which I know the website is never easy to navigate. So what I would advise you to do is just go to the search bar near the top of that page and search for congregational audit or disability audit. Any of those words will kind of get you to where that document is. The second audit is from APSI. It originated, I think with an APSI workshop that was done a number of years ago, but it's a joint project between the Office of Christian Formation from our denomination and APSI, and it's housed on a different website from the PCUSA. That website is called Opening Doors to Discipleship, and we can take a closer look to both of those. I will say I will give you both of these documents in the handouts that I'm going to share as well, but let's take a look at some of the differences between these two. So my question I put on the slide is one better? And I would say no, but it kind of depends on what you're looking for when you start doing these assessments. So let's think about the one on the right first, the APSI. APSI is really good at helping you think about and assess your physical space and your property. It doesn't move beyond that. So it gives you a lot of questions, and it kind of has you walk through and assess the space. Like some of the questions are, how many entrances to your building do you have? How accessible are there? Are there steps? Are there places where you can come in where there are no steps? So it's looking at all of the physicality. The PCUSA document is much different, and it's much more extensive. It has 10 pages of checklist statements concerning worship, leadership, policy, communication, mission, as well as an extensive section that looks at the facility specifics. Each statement that it has, and I think there's like 160 statements, I don't really remember, but it's a lot. And each of those statements has 3 possible responses from you. And that's either yes, no, or needs action. So yes, we do this, but we could be better. No is we don't do it right now. And needs action, I interpret that as that could mean one of 2 things. It either means yes, we do it, but again, we could be better. And the other option is no, we don't do this, but we would like to start. So the only time I think that you would check no is this isn't something we do and we really aren't considering doing it, at least for right now. They do recommend that you do these audits on occasion to kind of see how you've improved and if there are areas that you then want to start thinking about addressing. 2 of the best statements in that document I want to read to you. Both of them come from the leadership section. And those statements are, number 1, we invite persons with disabilities to help assess our building and ministries for barriers to participation. We take seriously such perspectives and engage these persons in setting the plans and priorities for removing barriers. And I think that's a great statement because it goes back to that belonging wheel. It's getting people with disabilities more involved so that they feel like they really are a part of your congregation. The second statement is similar, and it says, we are committed to a ministry with persons with disabilities rather than ministry to persons with disabilities, which again is about integrating people into the life of your congregation and making them feel they belong. So thinking about those statements, how would you say your congregation or you would respond to those statements? Is it a yes? Is it a no? Or is it needs work? So I want to move on from that. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on physical buildings, but I do want to address a couple of things. I'll have y'all, I can see some of y'all, so I'll have y'all raise your hands to a question. How important do you think it is if you go to any facility and you're going to spend a decent amount of time there? How important is it that they have bathrooms available for you? You can just kind of raise your hand or unmute and say, yep, me. How many of you have gone to a store or a business where they say their restrooms are only for employees, but you have begged them to let you use their restroom? This is a thing, right? This is a whole thing. Bathrooms are really important. So I would say that it is really important for every congregation to have at least one bathroom, and it can be unisex, but one bathroom that's accessible. If you ever hope to have anybody with a mobility concern as part of your congregation, you need to have one bathroom that's accessible. I would say you need to have more than one, but at least one. The other big issue in our churches, especially in older church buildings, is stairs. And again, this is for folks who live with mobility concerns, and one of the reasons I haven't been able to get to all of the presbytery events. Ramps, elevators are kind of the modifications that we've talked about in the past, or people have tried to implement. Sometimes the ramps become an issue because you don't have enough space to make one that's ADA compliant. The elevators become issues because they are prohibitive cost-wise. But I have recently discovered an alternative for either ramp or elevator that is not is fairly low cost and is actually available from a company that's not too far away from us. So I want to make you aware of that. And it's called the Flex Step. I know some of you probably can't see this side. It's a Flex Step platform by a company known as Lift Up. So I will let us watch the video, and then I'll speak a little bit to this. So I had never seen that before until last year. And when I will say, when a friend of mine shared it on her Facebook feed, I thought, well, that's wonderful, but she's in England and I assume this is only available in Europe, because that's the reality of most things that I see that I think are super cool are never available here. This one actually is. There's a company in Greenville that's known that the company name is 101 Mobility. They will install this on site for $30,000 to $35,000, which I know still sounds like a lot, but in terms of other things that we talk about needing to do with our buildings to make them accessible, I think that's actually not that big a cost. You do have to have the site prepped for them. So if there's a staircase already in place, you have to have that removed, which demolition is actually not that expensive. So you have to have that removed, and the space underneath it needs to be level for this to be put in. You also need to have a 230-volt power supply installed nearby for this to plug into. I will say that it works even during power outages because there's a battery backup that goes with that. And it reverts to stairs after 1 minute of non-usage. So the person that uses it doesn't have to transform it back. It does that on its own. It's customizable. It goes as low as just 9 inches. So if you just have one step somewhere in your facility and need an assist with it, that works for that. And it goes all the way up to 51 inches in height. It's also customizable in width from 27 to 39 inches wide, and it holds up to 880 pounds. In the handouts, I will send you the brochure as well as the information for that company in case you are interested. If neither this nor making an accessible bathroom possible is financially viable for you all, then I really strongly recommend that you do spend a lot of time on those congregational audits and work on making your church facilities and your practices and activities as accessible as possible. I also strongly suggest that you advertise and communicate both how you are accessible and how you are not accessible in absolutely everything that you put out. So your website, your social media, your newsletters, email blast, even when you talk to people on the phone about your congregation, make it clear where you're accessible and where you're not. And that's just so that people that show up who happen to have a disability don't get surprised or disappointed by the obstacles that they encounter. All right, we're moving on to other aspects of accessibility, specifically in worship. And I want to address some of the ways that we're inaccessible and can modify those things. And then we're going to talk about the ways we can become more accessible for specific groups of people. So this is just a slide talking about striking notes in worship and how we sometimes fall short. So I want to start with hymns because not a lot of people talk about the language that we use in our hymns, and you would be surprised at the number of times that language around abilities shows up in our hymns. And I've given you a list of the first five there are about. First four there are about abilities, and there are a lot of others. Just a few things you might not realize. The word "here" shows up 113 times in our hymns, and this is in the Glory to God hymnal. Walk appears 22 times, stand 66 times, listen 29 times, singing, which you would expect in a hymnal, 211 times. And I have a question there above these hymns about ableist. Are these ableist hymns? In other words, do they kind of prioritize being able to do these things to the point that it might sound like if you can't do these, you really aren't normal, like you might be less than normal if you're unable to do these. Now, that question about whether or not these are ableist is not up to it's not up to those who can do all of these things to decide. It's up to people who struggle with doing these things. And so you need to be kind of open to hearing people who have issues with these hymns. You know, if they're struggling with them, you might actually have to kind of set them aside or talk through different ways that you might use them so that everybody's comfortable with the language. Amazing Grace is a great one to look at for that And it's partly because it's in public domain, so you can make some modifications without having to ask permission. The one modification that people have looked at or talked about utilizing is in the very first verse, which we all know. It says, I once was lost, but now I'm found, was blind, but now I see, which most of us will take rhetorically, right? Blind, spiritually blind, and Jesus has helped that. But some people with failing eyesight might take that more literally and think that it's disparaging the fact that they can't see and that, they haven't been healed. So maybe it means Jesus doesn't love them as much as he loved all these other people. Modification that's been suggested for that is saying instead, I once was bound, but now I'm free. So it doesn't change the rhythm, it doesn't change the rhyme. And again, this is in public domain, so you can make that suggestion of modifying it and just let the congregation know that you all sing those words instead of the original. Three others that I've listed here that are kind of hymns that you can use instead of some of these at the top, or just kind of make them part of your routine when you worship, so that you get kind of a balance of the two hymn types. I want to talk about each one of them, but the first one, when hands reach out, this one speaks about the beauty that's present in those who do things differently from those who are neurotypical or ability typical. The best line, I think, in that hymn is this one. It says, we thank you, God, that hands can sing. You bless the silent songs we sing. And that's in reference to the beauty of sign language. We cannot measure how you heal actually addresses the fact that not all illnesses can be cured, and some people live with lifelong conditions that will not be healed. And the third one is healer of our every ill. And that one, I was going to read the footnote, but if I can remember it, I'll just give you the first line of it so that you get a sense of what that one is like. So it's the refrain says, healer of our every ill, light of each tomorrow, give us strength beyond our fears and hope in all our sorrows. So kind of making reference to the fact that, not everything is going to be healed, but that God is with us in all of the things that we go through, giving us strength and hope. So this is some of the ways that you might kind of start rethinking the language that you use even in your music. We'll move on from there. A couple other things that are problematic, the way that we speak or do things in worship. The first of these is when we say, please rise or stand and join us in, or please stand as you are able. And doing that as you are able really just points out the people who aren't able. So some of the things that we can say that are better is please rise in body or in spirit. That one I hear often, and that's a good one. Other than that, here are a couple others that you can use that give people some options to decide for themselves. And it's, I invite you to adopt a posture of prayer or reverence as we join in our worship, as we do the call to worship, as we sing this hymn together. Or let us lift our hearts to God as we. So it gives some people options to do what they feel comfortable with or what they can do in that moment. And one other thing I want to talk about is just at the bottom, when we do some kind of making people recognized during worship, we want them to be known or seen. You know, maybe when your session is rotating off and you want to acknowledge the officers who have served for 3 years and will be rotating off. Usually what we'll say is, please stand. And usually what we say is, please remain standing while everybody else is recognized as well. And that becomes problematic for some folks, even just folks who are a little older and might have back pain when they stand. So it's good to give people options for that as well. So you might say, stand if you wish, or you can raise your hand, wave your arms, make some noise so that we know who it is that we're recognizing while we're worshiping here today. Again, now I want to move on and look at specific ways that we can make worship and other activities more accessible for specific groups. So we'll start with folks who have visual impairments. So these are just, the icons are just so that you can kind of take a look and see, what we're talking about, but I'm going to address those specifically without pointing out the icons. So for those with the visual impairment, large print bulletins. So you want to make sure you have everything printed, at least some copies in large enough font. And I would say with those things, with the bulletins, please be sure that you include the announcements. Be sure you include the words for the hymns that you're singing, as well as the text for the scripture lessons. And that's important because the words, the print in our hymnals and very often in our pew Bibles is not large enough for folks to see without some sort of magnification. And sometimes their glasses are not enough for that smaller print. You also want to be sure you have good lighting so that people can see clearly. You want to have good signage. You want to have good signage around your facilities anyway, but make sure that it's using readable fonts, so not anything really fancy or intricate, and also have good contrast. It's better not to use color on color because sometimes that becomes an issue for people who have color blindness. So you want to use like these signs have, you want to use neutrals, a darker color with lighter font, or a lighter color with very dark font are both good options. You want to keep your paths clear and hallways clear in your buildings as much as possible, but for places where you can't, you want to make sure that you have marked any permanent obstacles, stairways, ramps, thresholds. If you have a strip between two different rooms at the threshold, make sure that all of that is marked as clearly as possible with a bright color. Move on from there to hearing assistance. So those with hearing impairment, that icon at the bottom right, the amplification system that pairs with hearing aid is kind of the gold standard for helping those who have trouble hearing, but there are other things that we can think about as well. So anyone who will be coming to your pulpit or your lectern to preach, to read scripture, or to make announcements should be advised to speak loudly, slowly, enunciate as clearly as they can, look up as often as possible, and that's to help folks who might be reading lips as well as using your amplification system. And there was one more and I lost it. Again, it's also helpful to have good lighting in general in your room, but you also want to be sure that some of that lighting is directed toward the pulpit or the lectern or wherever people will be standing to speak. And again, that's because some folks are probably trying to lip read as well as listen. Anyone who's going to be speaking from within the congregation, if you know they're going to be speaking, be sure that they have either a lavalier mic or a portable mic to use. Please do not permit people to say, I'm loud enough on my own, I don't need a mic. And that's because if you let people do that, the people who are using your amplification system will probably not hear that part of the announcement or the conversation. If you don't have those things, you don't have a portable mic, or it's just too much of a hassle or time or energy to get somebody to run and get one, then make sure that the person who is at the lectern or the pulpit with the mic repeats what that person has said so that everybody has the opportunity to hear it. One more of those. So for people who use mobility assisted devices when they come into your worship space, if you have pews and you can afford to make the modifications, do what this picture shows. Make some of your pews a little shorter so that folks with mobility devices can park their device there and get into the pew beside it, or can sit there in their wheelchair or their scooter. I'm recommending that you do that kind of throughout the sanctuary so that folks with mobility issues don't feel like they have to be relegated to either the back or the front where there's a little more room. They can end up being more integrated into the worshiping body. Also, I would make a note that as much as possible, please do not take mobility devices from folks and park them somewhere else in the room. And that is for two reasons. For one reason, if there's an emergency in your space, you don't want to have several people trying to go get mobility devices for somebody else so that they can leave the space during an emergency. It's also just in case they need to get up for something during the service, like they need to walk around if their back hurts, they need to stretch some muscles, they need to step outside, they need to go to the restroom, so that it's as unintrusive as possible to your worship service, that they can get up and do that on their own and don't have to wait for assistance from anybody else. Okay, so this is the most complicated one. It is also one that I am not an expert in, but I've done some reading on. So this is for individuals who have sensory perception or sensory processing conditions. And there's a number of things that might fall under that big umbrella. So people with autism, folks with ADHD or Down syndrome or traumatic brain injury or trauma in general, even some conditions like hyperacusis and tinnitus might have some of these issues with sensory perception. That what that means for them is that they sometimes cannot enjoy or take in the information from our worship services and our activities because their nervous system goes into overdrive. So they get overwhelmed by noise or light. Like it can be too much. Lighting can be too bright or too busy, coming in from too many different directions. Sound can be too much in terms of volume or in terms of it's coming from too many different directions. There's too many people around them that are singing at the same time. So they either get anxious or they get feeling like they're just not safe. It can get to feel a little claustrophobic. And sometimes they just need some of these things that are on the slide to help them. So we'll start with the things on the left. The things at the upper part of the left are called fidget toys. The one on the right there is a spinner. The one on the left is a cube that has kind of different activities. It's a very small cube. It fits kind of in the palm of your hand. I actually have one of those that has helped me at times that it's just there's too much going on, kind of focuses my attention so that I can actually pay attention to other things. The thing underneath is called, they're tactile kind of sensory pads that you hold in your hands. They have different patterns on them. And again, it just kind of focuses your attention, your sensory perception, your sensory attention on one thing. And that allows you to be calm enough to take in other things around you. Those are some things that you can offer during worship services or activities so that folks can have those as needed. For congregations who have more funding available or more space available, they might design a room like this one that's set up in the middle. You can see the blue lights that are there. They recommend that you kind of use some muted lights instead of the bright white typical lights that we have in our worship spaces. So this you can set up at a distance from your sanctuary so that the sound kind of naturally gets muted. I've seen other congregations who have set it up kind of as an extension of their worship space. So kind of beyond the back of the worship, you might build another room or fashion a room from space you already have. They typically do that with like thickened insulation to mute some of the sound, but they've also had it set up with speakers that you can control the volume of the space, or dimmable lights, and they'll make some of the same kind of assistive fidgeting toys and tactile toys available for folks as well. You can also make available or invite people to bring their own noise canceling headphones to kind of help. This is never kind of set up as, if you come to our services, this is where you sit. It's always kind of set up as an option for people who feel like they need it, either for the entirety of worship or for a few minutes of it. If it gets overwhelming, if worship gets overwhelming for them, they can step into this space for a few minutes and then come back and join everybody else in the regular worship space. That's what I have for worship, and I'll move on from there and show you this that I got from a presentation that I went to just a year or so ago. It's a recommendation that they gave that, you know, if you have folks in your congregation who have accessibility needs, they're living with disability, you give this to them and you have them fill it out so that your congregation is made aware of who needs what and can figure out how many large print bulletins to make, or how many hearing loops they need, or if they need to kind of line up some folks who can help with transportation. I think these are fabulous, but as somebody who's living with a disability, my mind goes to the fact that you're only handing this to people who have disabilities, which can make those folks kind of feel like they're singled out or less than in some ways because they're the only ones that need modifications made for them. And that's not actually true. If you think about your congregation at large, there are other people who need things. And so what I recommend is that you modify it. You make this about needs in general and not just about needs for those with disabilities. So I have listed a whole lot of other things on this form that could be added. I'm not recommending that you add all of them, but I'm recommending if you want to do something like this for your congregation, you think beyond these disability and accessibility needs, and you start thinking about what people might actually need. That you might have some people who need these sensory toys. You might have people who would just like to have a text reminder of an event kind of a day before it happens, 2 days before it happens, so that they don't look at their newsletter from the beginning of the month and forget that there's something coming up on the 23rd. You might have some folks who just would really like to have a printed sermon because they follow easier if they're reading along or if they have it to look at later. And then there's a whole lot of other things that I've put here as well, and you can look over those and decide what might be good for your congregation. And just when you hand this out, I recommend you give it to your entire congregation, and it gets you a whole lot of information about things that I guarantee you did not know about your folks, and it helps you plan for what's going to be most helpful for everybody in the room. That is actually all I have, except the one last slide that I want to show you is just showing you how many experts you actually have that can help you with this. So on the left, I have listed the 4 most current disability consultants that our denomination has: one for hearing, one for mobility, one for visual, and one for intellectual and neurodiversity. These on this slide are the most current consultants that we have. If you look at the congregational audit that I mentioned at the beginning from the PCUSA, it has consultants listed. Those have not been updated. So these are the 4 current consultants for the denomination. On the right, you will see my name listed as part of the disability and inclusion team, and Tamara, like she said, is one of the other folks on that team, along with Beth Ann Miller and Carol Brown. I have given you all of our emails. We are available for you as well. And at the bottom, I have made a note with a couple of asterisks about congregational consultants, because you have them. You all have them, and they are your best and first line experts that you should be going to, because they are the ones living with disabilities or their family members of disabilities, and they can help you out and let you know what it is that they need, and therefore what it is that your congregation needs to be thinking about as you talk about disability and becoming more inclusive and accessible in your congregation. All right, and that is what I have. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, if I can figure out how to do that. Stop sharing my screen, and I'll see if anybody has any questions. We have just a few minutes. All right. Stop sharing screen.
Nope.
There. All right. All right. I do know we're down to the last few minutes, but does anybody have any questions?
Christine?
Yes.
Christine? Hey, this is Bonnie. One thing we learned with all of the great lighting that we need to do our live stream and all, when we printed our large print bulletins on good quality paper, people complained about the reflection from all the lights on that paper. So we had to go back to basic bond so that they could read the large print bulletin without interference. So that's another thing you need to consider, the type of paper you use. The real slick, nice stuff isn't going to work.
Okay, great, thank you. Yeah. Yep. All right, anybody else?
Christina, your presentation was really informative and thought-provoking. Thank you for doing that. This is not a question, but just a comment. My son is an expert on aging in place adaptations, and it strikes me that there are very many of your suggestions that also fit with that. And there's some really good sites on aging in place that might supplement people's ideas about other parts of the church, for example, the kitchen. But I really thank you for doing that. This has been really informative.
Good, thank you. I appreciate that. And that's very good insight as well, because you're right. I didn't even talk about the kitchen, but yes, there's a lot of places in our churches that we really need to think about, you know. And
Well,
most
thank
of us
you.
have aging congregations, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Ed, you're set to close us in prayer.
I certainly will. And just wanted to comment that at First Belmont, they have been working on this exact issue. They have just cut away several of the pews to make room for wheelchairs, and they've also put the wheelchair symbol on the pillars so that people can come into the sanctuary and they see where those cutaways are, so they can go right to them.
Nice, that's great. Thank you.
And no up and down. We have an elevator. They go right in. So anyway, thank you so much. I really appreciate this, and I know all the others do too. And let's close with a word of prayer. Gracious God, we thank you for this time of learning, this time of opening eyes and ears, and to listen to you and to hear your voice through Christina. We ask that you be with us now and help us to better serve all of God's people through adaptations that we can make, and to help not only that, but to help all of God's people to better serve you. We ask this in Christ's name. Amen. Thank you, Christina.
Thank you again, Christina.
You're very welcome. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.